Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back to a time when your friendly neighborhood barber could do a little off the top, or a little off the limb. You step out of the soot-streaked alleys of Tudor England, the air thick with wood smoke and the faint scent of boiled cabbage, and push open a small wooden door swinging on leather hinges. Inside, it's warm, loud, and busy. The walls are a motley of tools and tinctures, and the floorboards creak under muddy boots and nervous feet. Men sit on three-legged stools, waiting their turn for a trim or a minor amputation. And the man holding the blade? He's not just the local stylist. He's your doctor, dentist, and part-time therapist. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not the episode, that part's safe. But this world, the real one we're diving into, it doesn't have anesthesia, antibiotics, or a decent understanding of germs. You get a splinter, it might kill you. You get a cut shaving, and suddenly your barber has to decide whether to bleed you out or slap on some moldy bread and hope for the best. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing where all of you cozy listeners are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a barbershop in 1532. It smells like sweat, rosemary water, and hot iron. Your barber is humming under his breath, his apron crusty with God knows what, and his hands surprisingly steady for someone who was elbow deep in a boil an hour ago. Barbers in Tudor England aren't just snipping sideburns, they're opening veins, pulling teeth, lancing abscesses, stitching wounds, and applying herbal poultices that sometimes help and sometimes summon the local priest. Their sign out front? A red and white striped pole. You've seen them, right? But this isn't about aesthetics. That pole's red for blood, white for bandages, and the brass bowl at the top or bottom, that was used to catch the blood. Yum! Your barber learned his craft from someone else just like him, through watching, doing, and hopefully not fainting. There's no formal school. If you're lucky, he's part of a guild, the Worshipful Company of Barbers, which tried to keep things somewhat regulated. But mostly, it's vibes and trial by fire. Or trial by trepan, which we'll get to later. He greets you with a nod and a mumbled joke about your hairline looking like the edge of a map. You chuckle, nervously. He wipes his blade on a cloth that hasn't been washed since Henry VII, then gestures for you to sit. You hesitate. The last guy who sat there left with fewer teeth and more leeches. You sit. His tools hang from a leather belt. Knives, razors, scissors, forceps, a hook that looks suspiciously like it's for catching trout. He picks up a shallow bowl, wooden, slightly warped, and pours in some rainwater infused with rosemary and vinegar. It's the Tudor version of a cleansing rinse, and also their version of not dying of sepsis. You lean back. He splashes it across your scalp. It's cold. It smells like a salad. As he lathers your face with a thick soap made from pig fat and ash, he explains what's on the docket today. A shave, sure, but also a quick humor balancing, which might involve bloodletting or purging. You glance at the door. He notices. Don't worry, he says with a grin. I've only had 2 patients scream this week. Historians still argue whether Tudor barbers were truly respected or just tolerated. In rural towns, they were indispensable, but in cities, they were often looked down on by academic physicians. Those guys wouldn't be caught dead with a razor in hand. But you know what? They also wouldn't be caught dead on a battlefield, and when arrows start flying, guess who's doing the impromptu surgery with a saw and a prayer? Oh, and fun fact, many barbers were also entertainers. They played the lute, told jokes, maybe even juggled. Because if you're going to bleed someone out, might as well keep them laughing, right? Laughter is the best medicine, unless you have the plague. Then you need mercury. Or possibly prayer. Or a very fast horse. Your shave begins. The blade glides across your cheek, careful but firm. He pauses mid-swipe to tell you about a patient last week who had a mole shaped exactly like a goose. You smile politely, trying not to move. He wipes the blade, flicks your nose, and says, "That'll be tuppence, unless you want me to bleed you while you're here?" You decline. Politely. He nods, unconcerned. There's always someone else willing. Some folks come weekly for bloodletting. It's trendy, like green juice today. Balance those humors. Get the toxins out. Never mind that no one can quite agree where those toxins go. You stand. You're a little woozy, maybe from the close shave, maybe from the smell of old cheese lurking behind the curtain. You glance at his hands. They're stained, nicked, and callous. He's no doctor by title, but in this world, he's the one who'll keep you alive, maybe. The next customer sits. An old woman with a wrapped wrist and a suspiciously glowing rash. The barber doesn't flinch. Just rolls up his sleeves, wipes his hands on his apron, and grabs a needle. Your visit's done, for now. But there's a lot more happening in this shop than a shave. And if you think that was unsettling, wait until you see what he does with your blood under the light of the moon. You're back in the same chair, though the sun has dipped behind the crooked rooftops, and everything glows amber and smoky. The barber lights a tallow candle with a flint spark and mutters something about the moon being just right. You're not here for a shave this time. You're here to get drained, on purpose. Because obviously, when your joints ache and your thoughts are gloomy, the only reasonable fix is to open a vein. The bowl is back. The same one he washed your scalp in last time. It's been rinsed, maybe. He pours in a little wine, mostly for show. Then he lays out a cloth, a razor, and a bundle of dried herbs that look like something a cat dragged in. Bloodletting, he explains in his sing-song lilt, isn't just a treatment. It's a ritual. A sacred balancing act between your four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your body is a stew, basically. If it tastes off, you just ladle out a bit. You nod slowly. Mostly because he's already tying a strip of linen around your upper arm and padding for a vein. This wasn't a fringe treatment in Tudor times, it was medicine. Mainstream, endorsed, respected. Everyone from bishops to beggars got bled. Especially during specific moon phases. That's right. The lunar calendar was the Tudor iPhone weather app. Waning moon? Time to let go of blood. Full moon? Might be too risky, unless you were already dying, in which case, go wild. Historians still argue whether the moon's pull on tides was metaphorically extended to bodily fluids or if it was just one of those medieval guesses that stuck like plague sores. Either way, your barber watches the night sky like a surgeon consulting a star chart. He pricks your arm with a blade so sharp it whispers. A thin thread of blood trickles into the bowl. You wince, but he hums contentedly, like he's making jam. He adjusts the flow with a press of his thumb, like tuning a lute. Too fast? You might faint. Too slow? The humors stay rebellious. He tells you about a nobleman last month who demanded his bloodletting take place under a waxing crescent, only to die of melancholy 2 weeks later. Wrong moon. Bad vibes. Very sad. Some days, the barber uses leeches instead of the blade. Today, you're spared. But you have the small box near the window. It wiggles. Leeches were premium tools, natural, self-suctioning, reusable. One noblewoman reportedly named hers Maurice, the bloodsucker. Honestly, not the worst pet option in 1535. You ask how he knows how much to take. He grins. Depends how pale you get before you pass out. That's not entirely a joke. There were no blood tests, no charts, just experience, trial, and error. The goal was to restore balance. You were too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, some mix that meant your personality, digestion, and dreams were all out of whack. And while you're sitting there, bleeding into a bowl that smells faintly like soup, the barber talks to you about astrology. Venus governs the kidneys. Mars rules the blood. Saturn brings the bone rot. He's not just your doctor and your barber. He's a poor man's astronomer, therapist, and occasionally, exorcist. The flame flickers. Your blood slows. He dabs your arm with a wad of linen dipped in vinegar and says, "There now. Lighter already, aren't you?" You are, actually. Mostly in the head. Outside, someone's banging on the door. Another patient. A boy with a fever, maybe. Or a man with a snake bite, or whatever counts as a snake in this damp corner of the world. You move aside, arm throbbing, sleeve red. The barber's barely cleaned the blade before moving on to the next client. Quirky side note, in some barber surgeons' ledgers, you'd find records of bleeding subscriptions. People paid monthly fees to be drained regularly. Like a medieval gym membership, but instead of fitness, you got woozy and possibly infected. You wrap your arm and shuffle out into the cool air. Tudor nights smell of peat fires and latrines. You feel drained, because you literally are, but also a little relieved. The pressure in your head is gone. Your barber wasn't wrong, entirely. Bloodletting sometimes helped with high blood pressure. Sometimes it helped you faint long enough to stop complaining. Either way, you're one humor lighter. And that's just round one. Because the next time something aches, something stings, or something goes cold inside your chest, you'll be back. With your coin and your fear and your best guesses. And if it isn't a blade, maybe it'll be pliers. Because guess what's next? The chair feels different this time. Less sacred right, more survival instinct. Your jaw is tight. Your palms sweat. You've got a toothache, the kind that radiates through your whole skull and makes you want to bash your head against the nearest beam. And in Tudor England, that's not dramatic. That's just Wednesday. The barber gives you a sympathetic grunt. He doesn't need to ask which tooth. Your face is already swollen on one side, like you've stuffed a turnip in your cheek. He squints, lifts your chin with two callous fingers, and makes a face like he just smelled something awful. Back molar, he mutters, rummaging for the tool that will probably traumatize you. You see it and immediately regret being born. It's a pair of metal forceps with curved pincers and a twisty handle. They call it a dental key, or sometimes just a key. Cute, right? Except it doesn't unlock anything but agony. The idea is to insert the hook around the tooth and twist until the whole thing pops out, hopefully before you black out. Hopefully. Tooth pulling wasn't just a job, it was a performance. The best barber surgeons could draw a crowd. Public squares would fill up to watch these procedures, like gruesome open-air concerts. People cheered, jeered, and occasionally fainted. You might not have anesthesia, but you do have community entertainment. Yay! As he holds your jaw steady and tests the grip of his tool, he offers a helpful anecdote about the time he pulled 6 teeth from a man who was later found to be wearing a mouthful of wooden fakes. Didn't feel a thing, he chuckles. You, on the other hand, are sweating like a pig at Lent. He slips the hook in. You gag. It's not even the pain yet, it's the promise of it. Then, with a quick prayer to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of dental disasters, he twists. There's a pop. A squelch. A scream that may or may not be yours. And then silence. The tooth is out. Probably part of your gum, too. He shows it to you like a trophy. It's brown, cracked, and vaguely horrifying. Bit of root still in there, he muses. Might fester. He shrugs and stuffs some rosemary into the bleeding hole. You whimper. Historians still argue whether barbers caused more harm than good in a dental department. But the truth is, they were often the only option for miles. Dentists as we know them didn't exist. You were either rich enough to afford someone with rudimentary training, or you braved the local barber and hoped he wasn't drunk that day. And speaking of fringe trivia, some barbers believed the alignment of your teeth corresponded to planetary movements. Bad toothache during a Mercury retrograde? Definitely fate. Maybe even witchcraft. One chronicler wrote about using horoscopes to schedule extractions. As if losing your molar under the wrong zodiac sign could mess with your karma. You lean back, dizzy. He offers you a cloth dipped in vinegar and clove, the Tudor version of antiseptic and mouthwash. It burns. You resist the urge to spit it at him. He smiles like this has been a productive visit. Fun detail? Some barbers offered replacement teeth. They'd pull teeth from corpses, yes, actual dead people, and sell them to the living. Just a light rinse and a good fit, and voila, your smile is back. With a hint of mortality. You stagger to the mirror, a smudgy, bubbled piece of glass hung by a leather strap, and peek at your mouth. Blood, herbs, and the gap of a now absent molar greet you. But you're alive. That counts. Behind you, a young woman is nervously seated. Her complaint? A rattling sound in her jaw. The barber fetches his spoon. You don't ask. As you leave, you hear a chorus of coughing, moaning, and one elderly man shouting about how his head feels like bees. You don't know what's worse, the pain or the solutions. But one thing's certain, the barber has answers. Not always good ones, but definitely loud ones. Next time, it won't be your tooth. It'll be your pee. And no, you won't be drinking it. Not this time. You're holding a small clay jug, still warm from your own body. You'd like to pretend this is normal, but nothing about handing your barber a fresh sample of your pee feels dignified. Yet here you are, standing in his dimly lit shop, while he swirls the jug like he's evaluating a vintage Bordeaux. Urine inspection, it's a whole thing. You thought barbers just cut hair and yanked teeth, but no. In Tudor England, they also moonlighted as amateur urologists. Because your urine? It's the key to your soul. Or at least your spleen. He holds the jug up to the candlelight. The liquid catches the glow, golden and cloudy, with a faint tinge of green. "Ah," he says solemnly, "your liver's feeling melancholy." You raise an eyebrow. That's not a joke. He truly believes this. And so did a good chunk of Tudor society. Urine was believed to reveal the entire state of your inner health. Color, clarity, smell, taste. Yes, some of them tasted it, even the presence of bubbles. All were clues. A thick sediment at the bottom? Spleen trouble. Reddish tint? Possibly love sickness. Clear as water? That's either very good, or very bad. He uncorks a small book from the shelf, worn leather, smudged pages, and flips to a diagram showing 20 shades of pee. It looks like the world's worst paint swatch. There's even a wooden urine wheel he spins occasionally, just to make it official. This isn't guesswork. It's science. You might be wondering, why pee? Why not, say, your pulse or your tongue? Historians still argue whether this obsession with uroscopy came from genuine diagnostic success or the fact that pee was the one bodily product people could inspect without opening anyone up. No scalpels, no screaming, just a pot and a flickering candle. And let's not forget the charm of fringe theory. Some healers believed your urine could reveal not just illness, but sin. A man once brought his mistress's urine to a barber under the guise of medical concern. The barber examined it and calmly replied, "This woman is with child." The man fainted. There were even those who claimed they could tell the future from urine. Like a liquid crystal ball. One poor soul reportedly refused to leave his house for a week after a barber told him his urine looked accursed. It turned out to be spoiled ale. But still, your barber leans over your jug, sniffs once, and mutters something about your spleen being a touch too warm. He pulls out a spoon, because yes, spoons were part of the standard toolkit, and dips it in for closer inspection. You don't ask questions. You just hope he has a cloth for that. Then comes the recommendation, a mild purge using rhubarb root and a warm compress over the kidneys. Also, he adds, try not to think sad thoughts around mealtimes. Sage advice. You nod solemnly, wondering if anyone in history has ever successfully controlled their spleen with emotional restraint. He seals the jug and places it on a shelf with 6 others, each labeled in chalk with the patient's name. One is glowing slightly. You don't want to know why. For all the oddities, there's a strange comfort in this ritual. In a world without scans, tests, or even thermometers, this is how they monitored health. The barber was your proxy for certainty. He couldn't see inside you, but he could guess. With enough flair to keep you convinced. And sure, some of the guesses were creative. One barber diagnosed a man with toad fever based solely on a sulfuric urine smell. Turned out the man lived next to a tannery. Still, he was treated for amphibian possession. With leeches. You leave the shop lighter, mentally if not physically. No blood drawn, no teeth lost, just a vague diagnosis about your liver being dramatic. The barber tells you to drink less cider and more nettle tea. You promise him you will. You won't. Outside, the town smells of old fish and fresh rain. Your neighbor is heading in now, a sheepish look on his face and a sloshing jug in his hand. He gives you a nod of solidarity. You nod back. Urine brothers. Next time, it won't be your pee. It'll be your scalp. Your itchy, possibly bewitched scalp. And the barber's solution? Let's just say it involves blades, powder, and a conversation about lice you'll never forget. You return to the shop scratching your head, and not just from confusion. Your scalp itches like it's hosting a barn dance, and the barber takes one look at you and grins. Lice again, is it? He says, already rummaging through a box of powders, oils, and what might be dried squirrel innards. You're too embarrassed to ask. Scalp troubles are a routine complaint in Tudor England. Hygiene is, shall we say, optional. Baths are rare, water is suspect, and hair is a jungle teeming with freeloaders. Lice, fleas, even the occasional tick if you're unlucky. So naturally, your barber is also your pest control technician. He pushes you into the stool and drapes a sheet over your shoulders. It smells like lavender, sweat, and the faintest hint of regret. With one hand he lifts your hair, and with the other he begins sprinkling a powder that makes your nose sting. It's made of crushed herbs, sulfur, and something gritty, likely ash. He says it suffocates the little demons. You try not to think about whether he means lice or something more metaphysical. Historians still argue whether these powder treatments were more symbolic than medicinal. Some records suggest the act of dousing and scraping had spiritual overtones, cleansing not just pests but impure thoughts. One Tudor midwife even swore that lice were physical proof of jealousy, which, frankly, is a harsh way to explain scalp infestations. The barber takes a small, flat blade, almost like a spatula, and begins to scrape. Your scalp tingles, itches, burns. Then sweet relief as the layer of skin is lifted, dead and dull, falling like gray snowflakes onto the floor. He hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like a funeral dirge. Between scrapes, he launches into a tale about a noblewoman who believed her migraines were caused by tiny spirits living in her hairline. She paid for a daily scalp lancing and insisted on being read poetry during the procedure. Blood and Byron, he chuckles. You nod, though you've never heard of Byron. He's probably local. He checks behind your ears and pulls out a comb with teeth so narrow it could double as a cheese grater. You flinch. He's thorough, meticulous, almost surgical. And in fact, head treatments sometimes did blur into actual surgeries. Some barbers offered minor scalp surgeries right there in the chair. Ingrown hairs? Excised. Strange bumps? Sliced and drained. You once heard a rumor about a man who asked his barber to cut a star-shaped scar into his scalp to let the bad thoughts out. The barber obliged. The thoughts stayed. The barber pauses, sniffs your scalp, not your favorite moment, and reaches for a bottle of rosemary oil. It's pungent, thick, and strangely soothing. He massages it in with firm fingers, muttering about cleansing the crown pathways. Is that a thing? Who knows? But it feels kind of amazing, in a medieval spa meets dentist way. Quick side note, wigs were becoming trendy during the Tudor era, especially for those losing hair from stress, disease, or fashion experiments gone wrong. Your barber offers to make you one if the lice win. It'll be made from horsehair and powdered with chalk. You decline. For now. Then he pulls out a metal rod heated in the hearth. Just a touch, he says, tapping the edge of your scalp to seal the follicles. It hisses. You yelp. He pats your shoulder and hands you a clump of dried lavender to bite down on. Better than biting your tongue off, he adds. Comforting. A quirky French theory from the time. Some barbers believed that the shape of your head determined your character. Bumps indicated strength, ridges suggested dishonesty, and a smooth crown was seen as either a sign of wisdom or an empty mind, depending on the day. You're now clean. Well, cleaner. Your scalp tingles pleasantly, the itch is gone, and the barber is sweeping up flakes and dead lice like he's closing up a snow globe. He tells you to wear a linen cap tonight to keep the spirits out. You nod. Again. Outside, you pass a boy scratching furiously behind his ear. He'll be next. And tomorrow? Tomorrow might be even worse. Because you heard someone screaming about fire and irons. And that means one thing, cautery. Blistering hot medicine. You don't know what hits you first, the smoke, the smell, or the scream. The barber's shop is unusually warm this morning, and not because he's feeling cozy. A small iron rod is glowing orange in the hearth. Next to it, a wooden stool with leather straps. This isn't a haircut day. This is a burning day. Cauterization, they call it. You stare at the glowing iron with dread, the way a fly might admire a candle. And your barber? He's whistling. A man sits hunched in the chair, pant leg rolled up, leg twitching with nerves. You recognize him. He fell off a cart last week. Now the wound on his shin is weeping something yellow and ominous. The barber nods, grabs a cloth soaked in wine, and hands it to the man. Bite, he says. The iron comes out of the fire. There's a low hiss, like a kettle threatening vengeance. And then, a flash, a scream, a smell like roasted pork. You almost retch. Your turn isn't even today, but your stomach is staging an early protest. Cauterization was a go-to Tudor treatment for wounds, ulcers, abscesses, even nosebleeds. Why? Because fire, apparently. The logic was simple. Burning closed wounds, killed bad humors, and kept evil air from slipping inside. Also, they didn't know about bacteria, so fire seemed like the next best thing. Historians still argue whether cauterization was ever truly effective or just a dramatic placebo that made everyone feel like they were doing something. But what's not debated is that it was common. Everywhere. Even traveling barbers carried small portable furnaces for roadside roasting. And it wasn't just iron rods. Sometimes it was boiling oil. Or pitch. or powdered lime mixed into paste and applied to wounds like a horrifying spa treatment. Some records mention fire powders that were sprinkled directly onto skin and then ignited. Because why stop at burning slowly when you can explode? The man in the chair is whimpering now, and the barber wraps his leg in linen soaked with vinegar and crushed mint. Helps with the sting, he says, though the man doesn't look convinced. You aren't either. Your own ailment is less traumatic, just a festering cut on your arm from a splintered door latch. But the barber examines it, tilts his head, and declares it suspicious. You groan. Could fester, he says. Could reach the bone. Better to scorch it early. You try to decline, but he's already preparing the iron again. You consider running. But then he pulls out something else, a tiny charm carved from bone, hanging from a string. Protection, he says. For the brave. You sigh. Peer pressure in a barbershop hits different. The iron comes out, steam rolling from the tip. The barber steadies your arm, presses a rag between your teeth, and doesn't wait. The pain is immediate. Blinding. The kind that wipes thought from your mind like chalk from a slate. You taste blood, not sure if it's from your arm or your bitten tongue. The smell, charred flesh, old wine, singed hair, wraps around your head like a fog. Then, it's done. He pulls back. You shake, eyes wet. He blows on the wound gently, like that will help. Clean now, he says. Sealed like a letter. He applies a poultice made from goose fat, honey, and something powdery you don't ask about. Then he wraps it in cloth and tells you to drink water boiled with lavender and sage. Keeps the humors from rebelling. Quirky sidebar? Some tutors believe that burning wounds release not just toxins, but spirits. Evil spirits, to be exact. There are accounts of patients screaming that they felt a devil leave them mid-burn. One particularly chatty barber swore he saw smoke rise from a wound in the shape of a tiny demon waving farewell. You're not seeing demons. Just stars. He tells you not to uncover the bandage for 3 days. Not even to peek. You nod through clenched teeth, stagger outside, and collapse on a bench that smells faintly of horses and regret. The wind bites your burn. You wince. But somewhere deep down, you admit you're glad it's done. Infection kills more than sword fights these days. And a small burn might be better than a big grave. You hear the next patient enter. She's limping. The barber lights another candle. And you? You'll be back, because what else can you do? Next time, it might be your turn to see him on the battlefield. Because barbers didn't stay cozy in town. They followed the war drums, too. You wake to the sound of drums. Not the cheerful kind from festivals, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of marching feet and creaking armor. War's in the air, and while most people prepare by sharpening swords or praying quietly, your barber, he's packing a saw. Yes, he's going with them. In Tudor England, barber surgeons didn't just snip locks and sniff urine, they followed armies into battle. Not because they loved the mud or the shouting, but because soldiers bled. And where there's blood, there's business. You catch him loading his cart. Not with food or clothes, but with linen bandages, tourniquets, jars of lard, vials of powdered herbs, and a roll of steel tools that clink like cutlery in a haunted kitchen. You point to the saw. That one's for legs, he says casually. Arms, too, if they're stubborn. You think he's joking. You're wrong. By midday, you've followed him to a makeshift encampment near the edge of town. Smoke from cooking fires curls into the sky, and the air hums with tension. Soldiers check their armor, say prayers, and throw dice. Your barber sets up under a canvas flap next to the latrine trench. Lovely spot. He lays out his tools on a stained cloth, scalpel, forceps, bone saw, curved needles. There's a bucket of water that looks like it's already been used for something regrettable. And beside it, a wooden bench with leather straps. Battlefield surgery is not elegant. It's loud, messy, and fast. There are no painkillers. No clean surfaces. Just muscle memory and adrenaline. And guess who's running the show? Your local barber. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons had real surgical training or were simply the best of the worst options. But records show that many were astoundingly efficient. One barber claimed he could remove a leg in under 90 seconds. Not bad, considering the screams. You don't have to wait long. The skirmish breaks out across the field. Arrows fly. Horses scream. The clash of steel rings in the air like church bells gone mad. And then, the wounded come. A man is carried in with a thigh wound, deep and gushing. The barber doesn't flinch. He tears open the trousers, clamps the artery with iron pincers, and starts cutting. The patient howls. A squire holds him down. The barber saws. Fast, rhythmic strokes. Blood everywhere. Then, snap. The leg's off. The stump is packed with wool soaked in vinegar. The barber grabs a hot iron rod, just like back in the shop, and sears the end shut. The smell hits you like a wall. You turn your face, gagging. He wipes his brow. Next, he mutters. You watch, stunned, as another man is brought in, this one with an arrow in his shoulder. Out comes the probe. The barber inserts a metal rod to locate the depth, then uses a forceps to pull it free. The man bites through a piece of wood. The barber chuckles. Should have picked oak. Fun detail? Barbers on the battlefield weren't just valued for cutting. They were also semi-trusted with diagnoses. A soldier with a head wound might be told to sleep on the cold side of the camp to counteract his hot injury. A man with belly pains might get a poultice of boiled mint and crushed beetles. Yes, beetles. Restorative, apparently. And if you think the battlefield was where medical rationality improved, guess again. Some barbers still applied leeches right there in the mud, believing it prevented infection. Others smeared wounds with boiled honey, soot, or even mashed figs. A fringe tidbit, there's one bizarre account of a barber stitching a man's severed ear back on using a combination of fish glue and pigeon feathers. It didn't work, but you have to admire the optimism. As the day fades, the pile of bandages grows. Blood-soaked linen is rinsed in buckets of vinegar, wrung out, and reused. Your barber's hands are stained red, his sleeves stiff with gore. He looks tired but weirdly serene. This is his element. You help him tidy up. He hums under his breath. War's the only time I get this much work, he says. Even if half of them don't pay. You ask how many survive. He shrugs. Enough. Sometimes. The moon rises. The moans of the wounded settle into a terrible lullaby. The barber leans back against a wagon wheel and closes his eyes. He'll sleep for an hour, maybe two, before the next emergency. And you? You'll never look at your town barbershop the same way again. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow, he's got beauty appointments. And they involve leeches. On faces. You're back in the shop, but this time there's no screaming. No glowing irons. No saws. Just soft candlelight, a mirror that barely reflects, and a woman reclining in a high-back chair with a cloth over her eyes. She's not here for a tooth, a boil, or a battle wound. She's here for beauty. And she has a leech on her cheek. Yes, welcome to Tudor Skincare. The barber leans in, adjusting the position of the leech like it's a brooch. It wiggles lazily, settling into her skin with the delicate grace of a horrifying noodle. She sighs, contentedly. It draws out the heat, she murmurs. You're not sure whether to be disturbed or intrigued. Beauty treatments were part of a barber's repertoire, especially for wealthier clients. And leeches? Oh, they weren't just for bruises and fevers. No, they were believed to improve complexion, reduce swelling, drain excess blood, and even fix uneven skin tone. Move over, jade rollers, there's a new squishy sheriff in town. The woman requests a second leech for her temple. The barber obliges. He keeps them in a ceramic jar near the rosemary oil. You watch as the little creature attaches itself with what can only be described as enthusiasm. Historians still argue whether leech therapy had real dermatological benefits or if it just made people too woozy to care what they looked like. But there are records of nobles, both men and women, using leeches as part of their grooming routine. Think of it as Tudor Botox, but with teeth. And slime. The barber turns to you. Need a touch-up? He asks with a wink. You decline. Firmly. He turns back to the woman and begins brushing a powder across her cheeks. It's a blend of crushed pearls, dried rose petals, and, wait for it, ground-up earthworms. Smooths the skin, he says, and keeps the spirits calm. A quick fringe tidbit, some tutors believed moles were not just blemishes but clues. Like freckles in Morse code. A mole near the lips? Passionate. One on the neck? Secretive. The barber reads faces like maps, telling fortunes while plucking stray hairs with a goosebone tweezer. The woman giggles as he applies a poultice of honey and vinegar to her chin. You realize this is less about results and more about the ritual. The warmth of the cloth, the scent of herbs, The whispered gossip passed between leech applications, its comfort disguised as medicine. You glance around and notice other beauty tools, small pots of saffron tint for lips, a bone comb dipped in walnut oil for darkening hair, and a copper mirror with a crack down the middle. The barber is equal parts stylist and sorcerer here. He knows which herbs reduce puffiness and which teas soothe a puffy ego. And if you're wondering, yes, men indulge too. Tudor gentlemen, especially courtiers, were obsessed with appearance. Pale skin meant you weren't a laborer. Plucked brows? Chic. Carefully curled mustaches? Essential. Some even powdered their cheeks to hide blemishes or bruises from, say, last night's tavern brawl. You ask the barber about his most unusual request. He grins. Once painted a mole on a man's nose. Said it made him look mysterious. Did it work? He died in a duel 2 days later. The barber shrugs. Might have been too mysterious. He finishes the treatment with a splash of rosewater and a whispered blessing. The woman thanks him, tucks a small purse of coins into his apron, and floats out of the shop smelling like a midsummer feast. As she leaves, a young man enters, holding a small cage. Inside? A toad. He wants to try the wart charm. The barber nods knowingly. Very well. Rub it, then bury it. You blink. The toad? Or the wart? You're still not sure. He sets the cage aside and begins preparing another leech, this one with a faint stripe. This one's good for jawlines, he says, as if that's a universally accepted truth. You lean against the wall, taking it all in. The gossip, the glamour, the vaguely wiggling skincare. This is no sterile spa. This is transformation by firelight. Ritual. Reassurance. Slight risk of anemia. And tomorrow? You're not coming for your skin. You're coming for your head. And the barber? He's bringing a drill. You're pacing outside the shop, hand pressed to your forehead. The throbbing in your skull has outlasted sleep, nettle tea, and your neighbor's unsolicited singing remedies. There's a pressure behind your eyes, a pulsing behind your ears, and a strange sense that your thoughts have started echoing. So naturally, it's time to let your barber drill a hole in your head. Trepanning. That's what they call it. The ancient, revered, stomach-turning practice of boring a literal hole in your skull to release pressure, spirits, or bad air. The barber opens the door, all cheerful despite the instruments he's already laid out on the table like a medieval horror buffet. You sit. He offers you a cloth soaked in poppy juice. It smells earthy and bitter, like something between wine and wood rot. This'll ease it, he says. It doesn't. But you drink it anyway. He examines your head with practiced fingers. Right here, he says, tapping your temple, where the thoughts are too tight. You don't ask what that means. The trepanning tool looks like an apple corer and a drill at a deeply inappropriate child. It's hand-cranked, slightly rusty, and stained with something that's hopefully wine. He wipes your brow, mutters a prayer, and starts shaving the hair from your scalp. Historians still argue whether trepanning had any physiological benefit, or if it simply created a psychological placebo effect so powerful it worked. Some suggest it may have relieved pressure from hematomas or even certain forms of epilepsy. Others believe it was an elaborate placebo, or worse, just a socially accepted way to keep moody people quiet for a while. The barber doesn't bother with such debates. He just hums. A fringe tidbit, in some parts of Europe, trepan skull fragments were worn as amulets. That's right, people would carry little pieces of their own heads on strings, believing it protected them from future headaches. There's even evidence someone once gifted one as a token of affection. Here's a bit of me. Literally. The drill begins to turn. Your vision swims. The pressure increases, then, pop. Not a hole yet, just the first layer. He wipes away blood with a cloth dipped in vinegar and crushed sage, then keeps going. The feeling isn't sharp, but deep, like someone knocking on your soul's front door. You try not to scream. You fail a little. Finally, he removes the tiny disc of skull and inspects it like a proud jeweler. Smooth, he says. That's a good sign. You're too dizzy to answer. He applies a poultice of mashed violet root and wool, wraps your head tightly, and tucks the bone disc into a box labeled Interesting Finds. You lie back. Lightheaded, sure, but oddly, clearer. Maybe it's the blood loss. Maybe it's the sheer relief that the drill has stopped. Or maybe, just maybe, something really did get released. Outside the shop, someone's shouting about demons and their thoughts. The barber glances out the window. He'll be next, he says casually. There's a knock on the door. A well-dressed man enters, wearing gloves and a look of quiet panic. I've been having violent dreams, he whispers. The barber nods. We have a tool for that. You want to say something witty, but words are fuzzy. The barber presses a warm cloth to your temple. Sleep, he says. Tomorrow you'll feel new. You close your eyes. And when you open them again, it's time to peek into something even darker than your skull, the barber's secret stash of tools. You wake up on a straw mattress tucked behind the barber shop, your head wrapped in linen and your memory wrapped in fog. The trepanning is done, and you're still alive, which feels like a personal victory. Your skull is a little lighter, possibly physically, definitely emotionally. The barber peers in, grinning. Up and about already? Good. You'll like this part. He gestures for you to follow him, and despite the dull throb in your temple, curiosity wins. He leads you behind the curtain that usually stays closed. The air shifts, cooler, quiet, and filled with the faint metallic tang of old blood. There, laid out like the world's most terrifying picnic, is the barber's private surgical kit. You've seen some of his tools before, but not all of them. And definitely not these. First, the knives. Long, short, curved, serrated. Some are delicate, like they're made for slicing herbs. Others are brute force blades that look like they belong in a war museum, or a kitchen for really aggressive poultry. Next, a bone saw, short-handled, fine-toothed, stained. He turns it in the light like it's a prized sword. This one's done 3 legs, 2 arms, and a finger I wasn't supposed to take, he says with a wink. You're not sure if he's joking. Probably not. There's a scalpel so thin it could slip between thoughts, and a chisel with a blood groove down the middle. Next to them, a clamp shaped like a bird's beak. It's for holding arteries during amputations. You ask how well it works. Well enough, he shrugs. If you're quick. Historians still argue whether these tools were copied from Roman manuals or improvised from blacksmith scraps. There wasn't a standard kit. Most barbers customized theirs over years, some even engraved initials on their favorite blades, like deadly love letters to themselves. He shows you a hook with a spiraled end. Polyp extractor, he explains. You gag. And then he reveals his prized piece, a trepan, this one older than he is, with a carved wooden handle and a screw-like tip for boring through skulls. Inherited from my master, he says reverently. Used it on a duke once. Did the duke survive? Long enough to pay me. In one corner is a bundle of cloths soaked in dried herbs, wound dressings. And beside them, tiny pots of ointments, goose fat mixed with myrrh, lard thick with mold, yes, on purpose, and a mysterious dark salve he swears cures bone fever. You decide not to ask what's in it. Then there's a tray of pins and needles, some long and curved, others short and sharp. Suture gear. He explains how he sews up wounds using thread pulled from sheep gut or human hair. Fine stitches, he says proudly. Even the priests can't see the seam. Fun fact, Tudor barbers sometimes use gold thread for stitching royalty, believing it kept the wound clean and the soul intact. There's no proof it worked, but it looked fancy, and in medicine, sometimes confidence is half the cure. The quirkiest tool of the lot? A hollow pipe with a carved wooden stopper. That's for earworms, he says. You stare at him. Sometimes, things crawl in. I play the lute near the ear and coax them out. You sincerely hope that's not a service you'll ever require. He opens a wooden drawer and reveals an array of experimental tools, ones he's made himself. A small press for flattening boils. A spoon with a blade for lancing stubborn abscesses. A bent copper rod he swears helps redirect the humors if inserted under the ribcage. You back away. Slowly. He notices. No need to worry, he says kindly. I only use that one on Tuesdays. The room has no windows. Just shelves of bottles, wormwood, mustard seed, foxglove, and racks of labeled jars, dried frog legs, snake skins, crushed beetles, and something that may once have been a squirrel. Medicinals, he says. It strikes you then, this isn't just a cabinet of tools. It's a library of pain. Every blade has a story. Every bottle, a theory. Some grounded in ancient texts, others whispered from traveler to traveler over pints of bad cider. And the barber? He's not just a practitioner. He's a collector. Of methods, myths, and the occasional miracle. He closes the drawer and dusts off his apron. Now then, he says, Let's check that head of yours. He pokes your bandage, gently. Good scab forming. Very promising. You nod, a little woozy. He offers you a sip of something that tastes like cinnamon, mint, and furniture polish. Tonic, he says. For clarity. You swallow and grimace. Tomorrow, you'll need that clarity. Because when you come back, the barber won't be using tools. He'll be using his nose. You're lying on the bench, arm outstretched, eyes closed. The barber isn't touching you. Not yet. He's crouched beside you with his face an inch from your elbow, sniffing like a truffle pig on a mission. You flinch as he takes another long inhale. That's definitely sour, he mutters. You peek. He's frowning in concentration, nostrils twitching. Sweet run in the center, he adds. Bit of pond water near the edges. You blink. What? Welcome to the barber's most elite diagnostic method, smell. In Tudor England, before thermometers and lab results, one of the most respected ways to detect illness was to stick your nose straight into it. Doctors, barber surgeons, even nuns trained their senses to pick out disease by its distinct scent. A sniff of pus could mean the difference between rest in bed and start digging a grave. He leans over your arm wound again, takes another sniff, and actually tastes the air. Spleen's not angry yet, he says. But the liver's throwing shade. You don't know what that means. You're not sure he knows what that means. But he seems confident, and that's half the battle. Historians still argue whether this sensory-based diagnosis was genuinely effective or just one of many medieval coping mechanisms wrapped in ceremony. But to be fair, modern medicine does recognize that certain infections smell a certain way. Gangrene? Awful. Some types of staph? Weirdly sweet. And even today, some doctors say their nose helps them spot trouble before machines do. Your barber has developed what he calls that scent vocabulary. Sweet like apples? Blood imbalance. Sour and sulfurous? Probably internal decay. If it smells like the Thames on a hot day, time to write your will. He moves onto the bandage on your leg and sniffs around the edges. He mutters. We might be entering cabbage territory. He fetches a bowl of vinegar and crushed garlic and begins dabbing it on the wound. Neutralizes the stink, he says, and frightens away the bad humors. The vinegar stings. The garlic makes you smell like someone's soup. You deal with it. Next, he examines your spit. Yes. He has you hawk into a spoon. He gives it a swirl and lifts it to his nose like it's a fine perfume. Milky, he says, with just a hint of disappointment. Too much phlegm. He prescribes a light fast, a pinch of mustard seed, and no emotional outbursts until Friday. That last bit may be for his own sake. Then comes the worst part. He asks for your boot. You hesitate, but he insists. You pull it off. He leans in toward your foot, sniffs once, and recoils. Oh, that's aggressive, he says. Like fish left in the sun. He fetches a little clay pot of balm made from sage, rosemary, and powdered snail shell. You're fermenting, he says cheerfully. This'll settle things. You sit in silence, half drenched in herbal slime and smelling like a spice market had a stroke. And still, he keeps sniffing. It's his art. His ritual. His weirdly specific hobby. Quirky tidbit, some barbers were so confident in their olfactory skills, they offered smell readings like other people read palms. One man reportedly sniffed a client and declared him destined to fall in love with a red-haired widow. 2 weeks later, he eloped with his cousin. Close enough. The barber finishes by inspecting the air around your body. He wafts his hand, tilts his head, and inhales deeply, like a chef appraising a stew. Not bad, he says. Could use more rosemary. Or less sin. He pats your shoulder and drops a handful of dried mint in your pouch. Chew this daily, he advises. And try to sweat less around goats. You don't ask. You walk out of the shop a mixture of man, herb, and cautious optimism. Your wound is healing, maybe. Your breath smells faintly of flowers, definitely. And your spleen? Still throwing shade, whatever that means. Next time, the barber's not diagnosing you. He's treating a wound with something that should never, ever be in a medicine kit. Bread. Yes. Moldy bread. You're seated once again on the familiar three-legged stool, arm unwrapped, and skin puckered with healing, but also, as the barber notes while squinting, looking a bit like a damp cheese. Which, in Tudor medical terms, is not a compliment. He rummages through his cabinet, muttering about needing something with bite. You flinch, expecting more leeches, or possibly a heated iron. But instead, he pulls out a linen-wrapped bundle and unties it with reverence. Inside? Bread. But not the kind you'd eat. No, this loaf has passed well beyond the point of soup-sopping or rat bait. It's gray, sunken, and absolutely brimming with green-blue mold. The barber grins like he's unveiling a sacred relic. This, he declares, is healing bread. You try not to breathe through your nose. Moldy bread, believe it or not, was one of the more surprisingly useful remedies in the Tudor first aid arsenal. It wasn't science as we know it, but some versions of this homegrown poultice likely carried naturally occurring penicillium, a primitive ancestor to the antibiotic penicillin. Of course, they didn't know that. They just knew it sometimes worked. When it didn't, well, there were always more limbs to cut off. The barber slices off a chunk with a butter knife that, to your dismay, also doubles as a boil lancer, and mashes it with honey, vinegar, and a powder you think might be dried ox dung. He mixes the paste with a flat wooden spoon and gives it a good sniff. Perfect, he says. Bit of zing to it. Historians still argue whether these bread poultices were used for true medical reasons or simply out of desperation and availability. But records show they were common, especially for infected wounds, dog bites, and mysterious flesh swellings. You suppose when your options are between flaming irons and fermented toast, you pick the one that doesn't sizzle. He slathers the paste across your wound. It's warm, squishy, and smells like a cursed bakery. Then he wraps it in linen and ties it with a string that probably came off someone's jerkin. Let that sit until it hardens. If it twitches, that's a good sign. You glance down. The moldy mixture bubbles slightly. You're unsure whether to be comforted or concerned. A quick side trip into quirky territory, some barbers claim that not just any bread would do. It had to be made on a Sunday, preferably by a widow, using flour that had been sifted by hand during a waxing moon. One even swore by loaves left near graveyards, blessed by the restless, he said. Back in the shop, the barber moves on to another patient, a boy with a swollen knee. He's getting the same treatment, though his poultice includes mashed onions. The smell in the room is now something between stew and punishment. You watch as your own bandage slowly darkens. The paste dries. It crackles when you move your arm. The barber checks it once, nods, and then, because he's feeling generous, offers you a sip of something from a small bottle. Healing wine, he says. You take a cautious mouthful. It's thick, spiced, and tastes vaguely of pears and despair. Old recipe, he adds. From a nun who used to treat arrow wounds and heartbreak. You drink the rest. By now, your arm feels warm, less tight. Maybe it's the honey. Maybe it's the mold. Or maybe it's the wine kicking in. He removes the bandage gently. The wound beneath is cleaner, less red. You blink. It's working. Somehow. He scoops up the crusted bread with a spatula and drops it into a small bin labeled spent. You really don't want to know what happens to that bin. Come back in 2 days, he says. We'll try a beet mash next time. Good for drawing out bile. You nod, still dazed. You rise, arm light, heart heavier, because now you're realizing your barber's more than just your fixer-upper. He's your chemist. Your baker. Your extremely strange, unlicensed pharmacist. Outside, the wind blows cool. Your breath fogs in the air. You flex your arm. No pain. No pus. Just the faint scent of yeast and onions. And the promise that next time, things might get weirdly royal. Because tomorrow, your barber's trimming beards and checking pulses for someone who could have you executed over a bad haircut. You arrive to find the barber not in his usual apron, but in something alarmingly neat, pressed doublet, polished boots, hair oiled to a shiny helmet. He stands ramrod straight, tools arranged like instruments for a royal recital. Something's up. Then you see the guards. Chainmail, polished halberds, and that unmistakable stare that says don't speak unless you're told to bow first. One of them gives you a look that could curdle milk. You back up instinctively, but the barber waves you forward. Today, he whispers, we work for the king. Your heart skips. Because in Tudor England, even royalty needs a trim. Especially one with a famously moody temper, a belly full of venison, and a track record of beheadings that would make a guillotine blush. Yes, Henry VIII is in town, and he wants his beard shaped. And your barber? He's the lucky man chosen to do it. He ushers you behind the curtain. Stay quiet, he says. Watch if you must. Just don't drop anything. He opens a small wooden chest containing his royal kit. Every tool is polished. The scissors gleam. The razor could slice a whisper in half. The soap smells of rose, cinnamon, and mild terror. The guards part, and in walks the king. He's broader than you expected. His red velvet robe is encrusted with jewels, his beard thick and wild, and his eyes, sharp. He lowers himself into the chair with a grunt that could be a greeting or a warning. "Make me look like a ruler," he growls. The barber nods and begins. This isn't just a trim. It's a political operation. One wrong nick could be interpreted as an insult. A poor line on the jaw could be seen as sabotage. Royal barbers were trusted more than some ministers, but also feared more than most. It's said that one clumsy barber once gave a duke a rash from dull blades. The duke's response? Public flogging. For itchiness. Historians still argue whether royal barbers held real influence or were just expendable servants with sharp tools and good timing. But records show that some, like John Penkethman, Henry VIII's personal groom of the stool, yes, that stool, had the monarch's full confidence. Today, your barber's steady hand is everything. He soaps the king's face with warm lather using a badger hair brush, applies it in swirling motions, and casually compliments the king's commanding cheekbones. The king grunts again, possibly approval. Then comes the blade. He holds it like a quill. One hand stretches the skin taut, the other glides the razor with the grace of a violinist. Hair falls in soft, curly puffs. The king closes his eyes, trusting this man with his throat. Your own breath stops. And still, the barber talks. Softly, cleverly, slipping in affirmations, gentle flattery, little nods to the king's military strength and poetic nature. Poetic? That's bold. This is more than grooming, it's courtship. A social performance with high stakes. The king asks about the latest plague rumors. The barber answers carefully, likely exaggerated, "Your Majesty. No disease would dare enter your court." The king smiles. That's a win. Then comes the pulse check. Yes, your barber is also monitoring the king's heartbeat, because in Tudor medicine, a strong pulse means a strong body and strong divine favor. He holds the king's wrist, eyes closed, lips moving silently as he counts. "Steady as a stallion," he says. The king likes that one. He finishes with rosewater, dabbed gently along the jawline, and a light dusting of talc. He steps back, bows deeply. The king stands, examines himself in a hand mirror, and, miraculously, nods. "Tolerable," he says. "You'll be summoned again." And with that, he's gone. The guards follow. The barber collapses into a chair the moment the door shuts. He exhales like he's just dodged a cannonball. "Did you see the mole on his ear?" he says. "Looked like a map of Wales." He chuckles, but his hands still tremble. Fun fact. Barbers often spotted early signs of disease on their royal clients, skin lesions, tooth decay, odd growths, and were sometimes the first to suggest treatment. Of course, saying "Your Majesty, you appear to be festering" had to be delivered very delicately. You help him tidy the tools, each one wiped, re-oiled, and returned to its velvet-lined slot. This kit will not be used on peasants. This is strictly for the elite. Outside, the street noise returns. Your own problems suddenly seem more manageable than royal mood swings and death by scissors. Next time, you'll meet the ladies. Not queens, but wives, mothers, herbalists. Women with remedies that would make the barber blush. Or, at the very least, take notes. You arrive late in the afternoon, when the sun slants low through the shop window and catches the dust and golden beams. But today, the barber isn't alone. He's seated his chair to someone else, a sharp-eyed woman in a thick apron, sleeves rolled up, and hair pinned with something that might be a spoon. She's seated beside a younger woman who's clutching her belly and wincing every few seconds. "You can sit," the older woman tells you, not unkindly, but with all the warmth of a scolding nun. "But don't interrupt. You sit. This is no ordinary barbershop moment. This is a women's hour, a hidden world of folk cures, whispered wisdom, and medicinal techniques passed from mother to daughter, midwife to widow, herbalist to whoever didn't faint at the smell of boiled goose grease. In Tudor England, women weren't usually licensed healers, but they were often the first, and best, option for everything from menstrual cramps to childbirth to bald spots. And when the barber hit a wall, he'd call on someone like her. The girl groans. The older woman reaches into a small basket and pulls out a cloth pouch. She unties it, revealing dried mint, meadowsweet, and rabbit fat. Warms the womb, she says, and keeps the air from turning sour. She doesn't explain that part, and you know better than to ask. She scoops a dollop of the mixture into her palm, warms it between her fingers, and presses it to the girl's stomach. The room fills with the scent of damp earth, tallow, and something sweet underneath, possibly chamomile, possibly regret. Breathe, she tells the girl, who does. Your barber is watching, learning quietly. He may have knives and cautery rods, but he knows when his blunt tools are outmatched. These women work in textures, presses, infusions, compresses, and in pulses more ancient than bloodletting. Historians still argue whether Tudor women were true medical practitioners or just herbal hobbyists, but diaries and letters suggest they knew more than most barbers when it came to female anatomy, fertility, and even mental health. One noblewoman reportedly treated her husband's mad moods with lavender wine and repeated doses of silence. You watch as the older woman gently rolls an egg-shaped stone over the girl's abdomen. To settle the womb, she explains, before muttering something under her breath that might be a prayer or a recipe. Maybe both. Then comes the hair tonic. A different woman, perhaps her daughter, judging by the shared jawline, produces a tiny bottle of thick brown oil. For regrowth, she says, pouring a few drops into the palm of your barber. He sniffs, nods, and dabs it onto your scalp before you can object. It smells like rosemary, nettle, and desperation. A quirky tidbit, some remedies for hair loss included powdered swan bone, crushed pearls, and the slime left by snails crawling across copper. Yes, specifically copper. There was a whole recipe book that called for soaking the slime overnight and chanting over it. Hair by sunrise, it promised. No one ever confirmed that. The older woman begins wrapping the younger girl's midsection with warm cloths steeped in thyme. Hold her firm, she tells your barber, who obeys, though a little awkwardly. No baby yet, she says, but the womb's waking up. You suddenly remember the rumors of womb wandering, a theory that claimed a woman's uterus could roam freely through her body if not anchored by childbearing or herbs. If you cough too hard or laugh too much, the womb might float into your chest and make you weepy. Ridiculous, you think. But also, maybe not. The air now hums with something different than usual, less like iron, more like wood smoke and moss. It's quieter, too. Even the usual street clatter feels muffled, like this room has wrapped itself in wool. Let her rest, the older woman says. The girl slumps back, eyes half closed. Your barber hands her a small pouch of coins. She takes only half. We'll be back, she says, already packing her basket with empty jars and used cloths. Next time, bring goose fat that hasn't gone sour. She leaves without a backward glance. You look at the barber. He's rubbing the hair oil into his own scalp now, muttering something about patchy spots. He looks up. They're better at this than I'll ever be, he says. And you believe him. Tomorrow, you'll need to believe something else, that sadness is in your spleen, not your heart, and that the barber can balance it by bleeding, purging, or possibly humming. You're sitting with your hands in your lap and a fog behind your eyes. You're not sick, not exactly. But everything feels heavy. The air, your thoughts, the space behind your ribs. You tell the barber you've had trouble sleeping, your stomach's gone sour, and you haven't laughed at your neighbor's goat jokes in 3 days. He nods solemnly. Spleen, he says, without missing a beat. Definitely your spleen. In Tudor England, emotions aren't treated by talking them out or writing sad poetry in the rain. They're blamed on humors, those famous for blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If one goes wonky, you go weird. Or weepy. Or both. Today, you're apparently full of black bile, which governs melancholy. And melancholy, they say, lives in your spleen. Too much of it, and you start sighing at shadows, craving figs, and suspecting your cat of betrayal. The barber gestures toward the stool. You sit. Again. He begins his ritual with a sniff of your breath, minty, thanks to yesterday's dried herb bundle, and then presses his fingers to your wrist to feel your pulse. Sluggish, he mutters. You've been lying down too much. You want to object, but you've definitely spent the week staring at the same ceiling beam and wondering if the birds outside are happier than you. He steps away and returns with a small cup of something thick and green. Purgative, he says. made from senna, chicory, and a dash of vinegar. You sip it, instantly regret it. It tastes like boiled lawn and sadness. Historians still argue whether these purges were ever helpful or just elaborate ways to make people spend more time in the latrine. But back then, evacuating the body, by vomit, sweat, or other less polite routes, was thought to be healing. Emotional imbalance? Flush it out. Sadness is sticky, he tells you, now smearing a mustard plaster across your lower ribs. It's warm, spicy, and feels weirdly like you're about to be baked. That's where the spleen sulks, he adds. You lie there while the mustard tingles your skin and the purgative bubbles in your gut. The barber hums a tune, soft and slow. Something between a lullaby and a dirge. He claims it helps. The humor's like music. It reminds them of harmony. A fringe belief? Some barbers practice melodic bleeding. No, really. They would sing or play lute music while opening veins, believing the blood would flow more honestly. One manuscript suggests that melancholy fears high notes and prefers gentle trembling strings. Who knew your spleen had a music preference? After a while, he wipes away the plaster and checks your eyes. Brighter, he says. Not cured, but climbing. He gives you a sachet to wear around your neck, filled with rosemary, wormwood, and a tiny bit of powdered pearl. To keep your bile in check, he says. And remind you to stand in the sun once a day, even if it's just long enough to sneeze. You step outside, still sour in the belly but with a little less cloud in your brain. The breeze is cool. A bird chirps. You don't laugh, but your lip twitches. That's something. As you walk away, you hear the barber behind you, next. You glance back. It's your neighbor. He's there for a trim. And for the gossip. Because tomorrow, the shop's less about spleens and scalpels, and more about whispers, winks, and tales of the dead refusing to stay quiet. You come in for a quick trim, just to tidy up around the ears, maybe a little off the back, but instead, you find the shop thick with the scent of candle wax, gossip, and something faintly floral. The barber greets you with a grin and a finger to his lips. Quiet today, he says. They're listening. You blink. They? He gestures subtly to the rafters. This isn't just a haircut appointment. Today, the barbershop has turned into the Tudor town square, seance tent, and medieval podcast booth all rolled into one. You sit. The chair creaks. Behind the curtain, someone giggles nervously, and someone else mutters a prayer. Welcome to the world of Tudor barbershop gossip and ghosts. In between shears and scalp rubs, your barber deals in the latest local lore. Who's fallen ill? Who's gotten rich? Who's been seen in the cemetery at odd hours? And who, exactly, is being haunted by their dead mother-in-law? Hint, it's the blacksmith's wife. As he drapes the cape over your shoulders, he leans in. They say she saw her in the window, wearing the same shoes she was buried in. You raise an eyebrow. He nods, stone-faced. Haircutting, in Tudor towns, is social theater. Men come in for trims, yes, but also to unburden secrets, spin tales, and share rumors so hot they practically set fire to the wig powder. The barber, always with his hands on your head or face, becomes a confidant by default. Where else can you complain about your neighbor's goats, your cousin's debt, and the ghost in your pantry, without judgment? Historians still argue whether barbers intentionally cultivated this role or if it simply evolved, but either way, they were the unofficial keepers of town history. A living archive of who did what to whom, and who was still pretending they didn't. Today, he tells you about a baker who's convinced her oven is possessed. Bread rising too fast, then deflating when she looks away. Could be heat, the barber admits. Or regret. You're not sure which is worse. He moves to your sideburns and drops his voice to a whisper. And then there's old Elias. You nod. Everyone knows Elias. Or rather, everyone knew Elias, before he died 3 winters ago, face down in a turnip cart. The barber claims he's still seen on foggy mornings, walking the same path to the alehouse, muttering about unpaid debts. Some debts, he says, even death can't clear. You chuckle, but the air in the room thickens. The woman under the dryer bonnet, actually just a bowl with herbs steaming inside, crosses herself discreetly. The man by the window stares too long at the fireplace. And then the barber leans close and says, "Want to see the ghost tooth?" You pause mid-nod. He pulls a tiny pouch from his pocket. Inside is a small, yellowed molar. "Came out of a man who died that night," he whispers. "Tooth never cooled." You hand it back very carefully. A quirky tidbit: some Tudor barbers believe certain body parts retain spiritual residue: fingernails, teeth, locks of hair. That's why many people buried clippings with their loved ones, or burn them to prevent lingering spirits. You, meanwhile, wonder if your trimmed hair is currently being swept into a ghost-proof jar. As he moves to the back of your neck, the barber launches into a story about a haunted privy behind the tavern. No one dares use it past dusk, he says. Screams. Echoes. Smells worse than usual. You glance at the man in the corner with the twitchy eye. He nods. He knows. He's used it. The haircut ends with a dusting of powdered herbs around your collar, part for the scent, part for the spirits. Rosemary keeps the dead polite, the barber explains, as if that's just basic etiquette. You stand, hair neat, nerves slightly jangled. The shop is quieter now. The fire crackles. Outside, the fog has rolled in like a sheepdog settling for the night. As you leave, the barber calls after you. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. It's just Elias checking his tabs. You smile, but you don't turn around. Tomorrow, you'll be back to explore something older than even ghost teeth, the pagan roots buried beneath your Sunday haircut, and the rituals no one admits are still being followed. You arrive at the barber shop on a Sunday morning, fresh from the chapel and full of that slightly smug piety that only comes after singing off-key and enduring a sermon about humility from a man with 2 horses and a mistress. The bells are still tolling as you step through the door and stop short. The barber is lighting candles. Not for ambience. He's laid out a bundle of dried herbs, mugwort, rosemary, yarrow, and circles them in the air, muttering something that's definitely not in Latin. The air smells like smoke and moss and old secrets. Haircut? He asks innocently. You nod, slowly. Today's visit feels different, and not just because he's humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a chant. The chair creaks as you sit, and he begins brushing your hair with slow, rhythmic strokes, clockwise. You notice. Always clockwise. New moon, he says. Best time for clearing. You want to ask what exactly is being cleared, but the way his eyes flick toward the shadows near the ceiling makes you hold your tongue. Because under all the Christian customs and barbershop banter, something older pulses through this place. Something pagan. Tudor England is officially Christian, of course, Catholic, then Protestant, then whichever version the king currently favors. But dig just beneath the hymns and incense, and you'll find rituals that predate pews and pulpits. And your friendly barber? He hasn't forgotten. He snips a few strands of your hair and, rather than letting them fall, catches them carefully in a cloth. Hair carries memory, he says. Can't leave it lying about. You wonder aloud what happens if you do. Witches, he replies. Or birds. Or both. Historians still argue whether the lingering pagan practices in places like barbershops were deliberate holdovers or subconscious habits. But there's no doubt they existed. Certain days were better for cutting hair, certain herbs better for wound salves if picked at dawn. Even the way the red and white poles spiraled upward mimicked the old-world tree designs in Norse and Celtic symbolism. He sprinkles water, definitely not holy, on the back of your neck and whispers a few words that sound like nonsense until you realize he's asking for the wind to leave you. Charming. A quick quirky note: some barbers practice fire cutting on special days, trimming the tips of hair by running a candle flame across them. This was said to seal in strength, repel bad luck, and make hair grow with purpose. You're pretty sure that's not how follicles work, but also, your cousin swore by it. He also married a woman who claimed to be descended from a forest spirit. The barber begins massaging your scalp with an oil made from St. John's wort and wormwood. Lifts shadows, he explains. Softens hard thoughts. You didn't ask for that, but you're not refusing it. Then, he wraps a red thread loosely around your wrist. Just for the week, he says. Keeps your words from curdling. You don't fully understand, but honestly, after last week's awkward tavern conversation with the cooper's wife, you'll take any help you can get. Behind you, the curtain stirs though there's no breeze. The barber doesn't look. Neither do you. He finishes the trim with a chant under his breath and sweeps your fallen hairs into a small leather pouch. I'll burn them at dusk, he says. Otherwise the crows come knocking. You pay. He waves your coin over a bundle of sage before tucking it away. As you leave, a small child runs past with a string of acorns in her hand. The barber nods approvingly. Protection, he murmurs. You walk home with your neck warm and your wrist tingling faintly. There's no thunder, no lightning, no burst of insight. Just the creeping realization that your tidy Christian life sits atop a vast, mossy root system of old beliefs, and the barbershop is one of its secret gardens. Tomorrow, you'll learn how barbers fought to keep their place, not just in people's lives, but in law. And the surgeons? Oh, they weren't happy about it. You walk into the shop expecting another cup of nettle tea and a story about someone's haunted chicken coop, but today, the mood is different. The barber is pacing. His apron is clean, but his brow is sweaty. A heavy ledger sits on the stool, pages bristling with wax seals and signatures. He's muttering. Licensing. Guilds. Surgeons with their long noses and Latin mutterings. You sit quietly, sensing a lecture brewing faster than a pot of dried elderflower. Because today, you learn that being a barber in Tudor England wasn't just about boils, beards, and beetle powder. It was also about turf. And nothing got bloodier, metaphorically, anyway, than the ongoing turf war between the barbers and the surgeons. See, for centuries, barber surgeons handled everything from shaving to skull boring without much fuss. They were practical, fast, and everywhere. But as science grew up and surgery started getting fancy, think books, degrees, Latin diagnoses, the real surgeons began drawing a line. They didn't want their craft associated with a man who also gave bowl cuts to drunk blacksmiths. Historians still argue whether the split was driven more by class snobbery or a genuine desire to raise medical standards. But either way, the 1540 Act of Union brought it all to a boiling point. That's when Henry VIII, yes, Beardy himself, formally merged the barbers and the surgeons into a single company, the Worshipful Company of Barbers and Surgeons. Sounds great, you say. The barber snorts. It was a marriage of convenience. And like most Tudor marriages, it ended in bickering and legal threats. Barbers were allowed to pull teeth, perform bloodletting, and handle minor surgery. But they were forbidden from performing complex operations like trepanning or internal procedures. The surgeons got the glory. The barbers got the pus. He gestures angrily at the ledger. You know what that is? Rules. Restrictions. Inspections. His eyes narrow. Last week a man came in with a coin stuck in his throat. I got it out with my tongs. Now the surgeons are complaining. You try not to smile. The image of this man using fireplace tongs to extract currency is oddly delightful. To make things worse, surgeons formed guilds that required expensive apprenticeships and lengthy training. Barbers? They trained on the job. You watched, you copied, you hoped you didn't pass out. But that also meant they were cheaper, more accessible, and, if you asked a surgeon, dangerously popular. A fun, quirky note. To display their legitimacy, surgeons began carrying silver instruments, embossed scrolls, and sometimes wore plumed hats to show their elevated status. Barbers responded by wearing cleaner aprons and, occasionally, displaying jars of leeches in the window. Nothing says credibility like an aquatic parasite collection. The barber sighs. They want me out of the surgery business entirely. Just haircuts. Just lather. He spits into a bowl. They forget who stopped a fever outbreak in town 2 winters ago. Not the surgeons. They were locked in their guild hall sniffing cloves and arguing about elbow boils. He gestures toward his back room, the one with the saws and jars and suspicious liquids. They want that gone. Sealed. Forbidden. His voice softens. But people still come to me when the child's burning with fever or when a man's leg won't stop shaking after a fall. They come here. And they do. You've seen it. People trust him. Not because he wears a title or recites Latin, but because he fixes things. Or at least tries. Sometimes, that's all a person can ask. A knock on the door interrupts the rant. A young woman enters, cradling a child with a swollen eye. The barber's frustration vanishes. He kneels, inspects the child, and murmurs gentle nonsense about bees and brave knights. He works quickly, without ceremony. Just cloth, balm, and an oddly shaped spoon. The child sniffs. The swelling subsides. The woman weeps. The barber nods, already reaching for clean linen. As she leaves, he turns to you. They can keep their titles. I'll keep doing the work. You don't say anything. You just sit there, watching the barber wipe his tools and return to humming. But tomorrow, the air will smell sweeter, falsely so. Because your journey continues into the strange perfumes and risky experiments that tried, and sometimes failed, to make this bloody trade smell like progress. You open the shop door and immediately gag. It smells pleasant. That's the first red flag. Not the usual stew of boiled wool, burnt iron, and vaguely medicinal mold. No, today it's rosewater and something citrusy, like a lemon gave up halfway through fermenting. The barber stands proudly in the center of it all, waving a cloth soaked in the stuff. Progress, he says, grinning. You cough. Are we disinfecting now? Better, he replies. We're elevating. Because today, it's all about cleanliness, or what passes for it in Tudor England. And more importantly, smelling clean. See, the idea of germs isn't quite a thing yet. But scent? Scent is everything. If something smells bad, it's dangerous. If it smells sweet, it must be safe. This, of course, is a flawed system. Still, your barber is embracing it with fervor. He's rinsing razors in rosewater, rubbing lavender on bandaged cloths, even dabbing pewter instruments with mint oil. It's part therapy, part theater, and part desperate attempt to fend off the growing whispers that maybe barbers aren't so modern anymore. Historians still argue whether these olfactory upgrades were truly hygienic or just olfactory cover-ups. Spoiler, it was mostly cover-ups. But there were moments, like when someone accidentally soaked a wound cloth in wine spiked with proto-antiseptic herbs, when it worked better than nothing. The barber shows you a bottle labeled Angel Tonic. It's a cloudy liquid that smells like soap and spoiled cider. New thing from the continent, he says. French. You sip. It tastes like regret and cloves. Supposed to ward off plague, improve breath, and make your hair shine. You don't feel shinier. Just more flammable. He starts cleaning his scalpels with a cloth soaked in vinegar and rosemary, mumbling, "The surgeons started this. Think they're better than us just because they were lazy and boil their instruments." You ask if boiling helps. "Only if the pot's clean," he grumbles. Then he shows you his latest innovation, pewter scalpels. Lighter than iron, easier to clean, and, he swears, less moody. He runs a finger down the blade. Won't hold a stink like steel does. That's something. And he started polishing his bone saws, not to make them sharper, but to make them look less threatening. Shiny tools, he says, calm the patient. You nod, unconvinced. A quirky trend? Some barbers now burn herbs while working. Not for aromatherapy, exactly, but to cleanse the air. Thyme, juniper, dried orange peel. It smells festive. And smoky. Occasionally, it sets someone's beard alight. There's even a new cologne on the shelf, basil and vinegar, soaked in spirits. Good for aftershave and fevers, the barber claims. You decide to keep your fever and your face separate. But the shift isn't just olfactory. He's experimenting with clean robes, a fresh apron each day, washed, supposedly, in rainwater and ash soap. And he's started using clean linen for head wraps, replacing the old recycled strips that smelled like a goat's worst day. Still, it's all cosmetic. There's no understanding of bacteria, no sterile rooms. Just the rising fear of being left behind. The barber's caught between ancient rituals and new appearances. Trying to look modern, clean, respected. You mention this. He shrugs. If the surgeons look like saints, I can at least smell like one. Then a boy bursts in, bleeding from the foot, stepped on a nail. The barber doesn't hesitate. He tosses the perfume cloth aside, grabs a blade that might have been cleaned with wine earlier, and goes to work. Bandages fly, the boy yelps, vinegar splashes. It's chaos. It's care. And when it's done, he dabs rosewater on the wound. For the scent, he says. And the mood. You realize then, the shop hasn't changed. Not really. It still bleeds, it still heals, it still tries. The difference now is it does so with a hint of time and a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might call it modern. Tomorrow, you'll see the curtain fall. The barber's role will fade, the surgeons will rise, and the world will change. But for now, you smell like salad. And maybe, just maybe, that's progress. You return to the barbershop on a quiet morning, too quiet. No laughter from the waiting bench, no scent of rosemary poultices or garlic-soaked linen. Just the creak of the sign swinging overhead and the distant clatter of cartwheels. Inside, the barber is cleaning his tools. Slowly. Deliberately. Not in the usual frantic, vaguely sticky way, but like he's saying goodbye to each one. Few coming in these days, he says without looking up. Folks are going to the apothecaries now. Or worse, the hospitals. You sit, not because you need a shave or a tincture, but because something tells you this is the last time you'll see him like this. This is the slow fade. The barber's final act. In Tudor England, the barber surgeon was once a pillar. A fixer of bodies, a reader of humors, a storyteller, healer, and sometimes, unwitting executioner. But now, the tide is shifting. Surgeons have degrees. Doctors have patronage. The barber has old tools and older habits. Historians still argue whether the barber surgeons were edged out by science or smothered by bureaucracy. Probably both. The 18th century brought more structure, more regulation, more fear of quacks. And the barbers, despite centuries of hands-on healing, were suddenly out of fashion. He shows you a letter, an official notice. You are hereby forbidden from performing any surgical procedure. It reads, "There's more." A lot of Latin. None of it good. He folds it neatly, slides it into a drawer. "They want me to cut hair and smile," he says. "Nothing else." You ask if he will. He considers. Some, but not the same. He picks up the old trepan, turns it over in his hand. This drilled through 6 skulls. 1 duke, 3 farmers. A man who saw angels. A girl with thunder behind her eyes. He places it back gently. Quirky tidbit, some barbers, when forced out of medicine, became traveling performers. They demonstrate old surgical techniques at fairs, using sheep carcasses or dramatic reenactments with too much fake blood and even more enthusiasm. One former barber turned his amputation routine into a song and dance act. Morbid? Yes. Popular? Also yes. But your barber isn't taking his show on the road. He'll stay here. Maybe trim the baker's mustache. Maybe treat the occasional rash on someone too scared of hospitals. But the days of battlefield legs and moonlit bloodletting? Done. You look around. The tools have been polished, labeled, some tucked away in boxes, some still on the wall, like metals no one asked for. The leech jar is empty. The bowl once used for bloodletting is now filled with potpourri. The last patient of the day walks in, a boy with a scraped knee and wide eyes. The barber smiles, kneels, wraps the wound gently. No fire. No mold. Just clean cloth and a reassuring hum. You realize then, the barber isn't disappearing. He's just shrinking. His world, once wild and wide, is becoming quieter, smaller. Less bone saw, more beard balm. And yet, he still knows things. Things the surgeons with their Latin won't touch. He knows how to hold a hand during pain. How to hum in the right rhythm to calm a child. How to pack herbs by feel, not measurement. He's fading, yes, but slowly. Like the last note of a song that still lingers in the room long after the music stops. You rise to leave. The barber nods. Not goodbye. Just until. And as you walk out into the dimming light, you hear him sharpening a blade. Not for surgery. Just for shaving. But the motion's the same. The memory's the same. And somewhere, tucked behind the curtain, the old tools wait. Just in case. Now, as the candle burns low and the last whispers of the day settle around you, you feel the weight of that world begin to drift away. The smoky shop, the smell of thyme and tallow, the scratch of wool cloaks and whispered diagnoses, these things fade, softening like an old dream. The barber's voice becomes distant, blurred by time and silence. His tools, once fearsome and familiar, are now only shadows in the corners of your imagination. That stool, that bowl, that leech in a jar, they rest in the past, still and undisturbed. Your body, once tense with the idea of tooth pulling or trepanning, now relaxes fully. There's nothing sharp left here. Just warmth, gentle light, the slow hush of sleep curling in like fog through a timbered alley. You can almost hear the razor strop, the rhythmic scrape of blade on leather, like a lullaby in disguise. The scent of rosemary returns, faint now, distant, as if someone just left the room and closed the door quietly behind them. Breathe in. Let it go. Whatever aches you brought with you tonight, real or imagined, leave them behind. They belong to that other time. That other body. In this moment, you are whole. You are quiet. You are safe. The barbershop fades. The cobbles dissolve. The red and white pole stops spinning. Only sleep remains now. And in the stillness, you drift. Sweet dreams.